The cabin was part of the deal. So were the 4 goats. And her. Marta. That was how the trader phrased it. Without hesitation. Without shame. 1 winter shelter. 4 goats. And the girl. A clean trade, he said, as if she were a bale of hay or a rusted trap, just something to be handed over. Her father didn't even flinch. He didn't look at her when he took the paper, dipped the pen, and signed his name in jagged ink that tore through her last thread of belonging. Marta didn't cry. Not then. Not even when the trader, Cutter, a man with rough hands and colder eyes, took her by the elbow and pulled her toward the mule cart without so much as a goodbye. She didn't speak. What was left to say when words no longer changed anything? The ride was quiet. The snow was beginning to fall, dusting the trees and the old road like ash. She sat beside a bundle of animal pelts, her hands stiff from cold and silence. There had once been a time when she believed her life might be hers. When her mother sang at dusk, and Marta braided her little sister's hair, when the fire was warm, and the roof didn't leak, and her father still looked at her with something other than dead in his eyes. But all of that vanished when her mother died, and slowly, piece by piece, Marta became less a daughter, and more a mouth to feed, a burden to carry. When Cutter came offering livestock and winter supplies, she supposed it made sense to them both, 2 men who measured life by weight and worth. The cabin was small and reeked of smoke and old meat. He didn't touch her that first night. He didn't even speak much. Just tossed her a flint, pointed to the hearth, and muttered, "Keep it lit." She did. For 5 days, she chopped wood, boiled water, stewed oats with dried venison, swept the floor until her fingers cracked. She didn't speak. She didn't ask. She'd helped raise her siblings, knew how to work, how to endure, but nothing prepared her for the slap. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't rage. It was indifference. "You burned the stew," Cutter growled, slamming the door behind him. "You think you're worth this roof? You think you were part of the deal 'cause you're pretty?" His hand struck her cheek before the words even finished. It tasted like smoke and old blood. The world spun. Her knees buckled. The pain spread hot and dizzy across her ribs as he shoved her through the door. Barefoot into the snow, she gasped, not from the cold, but from the sound of the latch bolting behind her. He tossed her coat after her, but it was dripping wet. He had soaked it in the wash bucket. "Try your silence out there," he sneered from inside. The snow bit into her skin with jagged teeth. Wind howled through the trees like wolves. She wrapped the wet wool around her shoulders and stumbled blindly toward the tree line. Each breath cut like ice. Her vision narrowed. Her limbs didn't move right. The world blurred. She fell. First once. Then again. Harder. The cold was no longer pain. It was a slow, numbing forgetfulness. Her body stopped shaking. Her eyes stayed open. And somewhere deep inside, the last piece of her shattered. She wasn't a person anymore. She wasn't a daughter, or a sister, or a girl worth saving. She was just a thing traded for goats. How did it come to this? She had once braided flowers into her hair, had once dreamed of learning to read like her mother, had once believed that maybe she could marry for love. All of it crushed under a single signature, traded for kindling and meat. Her breath slowed. If this was dying, it wasn't fire or fear. It was being erased, quietly, fully, without anyone to notice. Then came warmth. It wasn't firelight. It was weight, blankets? No, hides, pressure, soft hands, a whisper in a language she didn't know. Small fingers pressed against her chest, her throat, checking, feeling. She couldn't lift her head, couldn't speak, but she heard breathing, felt bodies pressing against her. Children. There were children. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. They didn't speak English. Not much. They didn't ask who she was or why she was broken. They just kept her warm. One curled against her back. Another pulled her arm over their shoulder. A third tucked fur tighter under her chin. No judgment, no questions, just warmth. She faded into darkness again. Not death, not quite, just a place deeper than sleep. A place where no one could trade her away. And when she woke, in a cabin that wasn't Cutter's, with firelight dancing and children watching her like she was some strange ghost. Something in her cracked, but not from pain. From relief. They had saved her, not because she was beautiful, not because she begged, not because she offered anything, but because someone should have. And in their silence, in their wide-eyed stillness, she saw what no man with a contract or goats had ever given her. Worth. And for the first time in days, maybe years, Marta let herself believe something impossible. She wasn't part of a deal anymore. She was part of something that didn't need one. When Marta woke, it wasn't to silence or snow, but to warmth, not the harsh crackle of Cutter's hearth or the sting of frozen air. But something quieter, something steady. A fur blanket, tucked under her chin, a straw bed beneath her. The air held the scent of smoke and bark tea. Her cheek throbbed, and every breath was a dull ache in her ribs. But she wasn't dead. 7 children stood at the foot of the bed, barefoot, wide-eyed, and silent. They didn't ask her name. They didn't question why a bruised, bleeding woman had stumbled into their world. They simply looked at her like she was something halfway between ghost and miracle. The smallest one, barely more than a toddler, clung to her side. Another girl, older, perhaps 10 or 11, knelt closest and whispered something to the others. They scattered, but one came back with a wooden bowl and carefully fed her sips of bitter broth. It tasted like bark, maybe roots, but it was warm. It lit a fire in her chest that hadn't burned since her mother's hands last touched her fevered forehead. She tried to sit up. Her ribs protested. The girl gently pressed her back down with surprising care. "No," she said softly, her voice hesitant but firm. "You stay." Marta blinked through the blur of light and pain. "Where am I?" she rasped. The girl tilted her head, not understanding at first, but another child, a boy older than the rest, standing near the hearth, answered in broken English, "Our home." The words didn't feel like possession. They felt like safety. They didn't speak much after that, just moved around her like clockwork. One stirred the pot, one swept the floor, another patched a rip in the curtain with careful hands. There were no raised voices, no sharp orders, just rhythm, survival refined into routine. Marta lay there, stunned by it all, by the quiet competence, by the fact that they were children, abandoned, forgotten, and yet still standing, still living, without parents, without protection, without Cutter. When she finally managed to ask, "Why did you help me?" the boy near the fire answered, "Because you not Cutter." Her breath caught. They knew him. Had he been here? Had he hurt them, too? The girl, Suli, she would later learn, lowered her eyes. "He try," she said, her words halting, thick with memory. "Before Mama stop him. Then Mama, die." The silence that followed was heavier than grief. It was recognition, a quiet, unspoken link between wounds. Marta didn't try to move again that day, or the next. Her body was too broken. But something inside her began to stir. A question she hadn't dared ask in a long time. What if I'm not alone anymore? By the third morning, she could walk, barely. Every step was like fire through her ribs. When she reached the door, Suli stopped her. "Too cold," she warned. "Too far. He find you. He thinks I'm dead," Marta replied. "Let's keep it that way." But when she looked at the children, she couldn't go. They stared at her not like a stranger, but like someone halfway through a story they needed her to finish. "I can't stay," she whispered. "This isn't my life." But whose life was it now? She had been traded like salt, tossed out like garbage, and yet these children had wrapped her in furs, laid her beside their fire, offered warmth without expectation, without even knowing her name. Suli tugged gently at her sleeve. "You stay, one more day?" Marta nodded. She told herself it was just for the night, just until her ribs healed, just until she had a plan. But that afternoon, she found herself sitting by the fire, watching the younger ones sort dried roots while the older ones sharpened sticks into tools. She didn't belong, not yet, but they made space for her. That was new. She picked up a torn moccasin and stitched it, her hands remembering skills she thought she'd buried with her mother. When she held it up, Suli smiled. "You, so good." Marta said nothing, but her hands didn't stop. That evening, she helped cook rabbit stew, thick with root paste. The children watched her, not nervously, but curiously, as if weighing whether this woman who said she wouldn't stay was already part of them. That night, she slept between 2 of the younger girls, their bodies curled beside hers like warmth itself. No screams in her dreams, just silence. When morning came, Marta stood again by the door. This time, her body didn't betray her. Her heart did. The wind outside howled low. The snow glared bright, and the inside of the cabin pulsed with something gentle and steady. There was nothing out there for her. No one coming to find her. No one mourning her absence. But here were 7 children who made no demands, who offered no judgment, who simply didn't let her die. They had been forgotten too. Abandoned, tossed aside by men like Cutter. And somehow, in that shared wreckage, they'd found something together. Home wasn't a roof or a name on paper. It wasn't a trade or a vow or a ring. It was a place you didn't have to earn love to stay. That afternoon, Marta took some old scraps of hide and began cutting. For who? Sully asked. For all of you, Marta replied, without hesitation. New mittens. Yours are too thin. The older boy, Toma, watched her. Then nodded. You stay now. Marta didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because that night, when they passed the fur back to her without a word, she didn't hesitate to pull it over her shoulders. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming something again, someone. And for the first time, she didn't have to do it alone. The snow had started to soften. Tiny rivulets slipped from the eaves of the cabin as winter gave its first reluctant sigh of surrender. Marta stood at the doorway, her hand on the latch, staring out at the white beyond. She could leave. The thought came not as a revelation, but a repetition, one she had whispered to herself a dozen times before. Just go, before you grow roots, before the children began to look at her like she belonged here. Before she started believing it. Her ribs had mostly healed. She could walk without grimacing. Her hands, once raw and trembling, had found rhythm in stitching and chopping and holding small fingers when nightmares crept in. She had taught Sully to write her name, helped Pip count to 10, cooked rabbit stew from memory, even hummed a lullaby she hadn't sung since her youngest brother was alive. And yet, every night she told herself the same thing: don't settle. Don't pretend this is yours. Because none of it had been meant for her. She wasn't their mother, wasn't family. She was a stray, like the wind blowing in from the north. Temporary. That morning, with the light clear and the sky kind, she pulled on her boots and said it again, mostly to herself. I can't stay. The children didn't answer. They just watched. Not with fear, not with anger, but with something quieter. A waiting sadness, as if they'd heard those words before. From other adults who had come, taken, and vanished again. I'm sorry, she said. This isn't my life. But even as the words left her lips, her heart clenched. Whose life is it, then? The one Cutter nearly ended in the snow? The one her father traded away with 4 goats? Or the one she rebuilt here, stitching torn souls, boiling bitter roots, teaching children to write? She stepped outside. The snow was firm beneath her boots. The cold not biting, just real. She took 3 steps toward the trees. And stopped. Her feet could move, but her chest couldn't. Her breath caught, not from pain, but from knowing. There was nothing out there. No one waiting. No future she trusted. But here were 7 small lives that didn't just survive her presence. They made space for it. She turned back. That afternoon, Marta didn't speak much. She sat near the fire, cutting hide into the shape of mittens. Sully came over and watched. For who? The girl asked. For you, Marta said. And the others? Yours are too thin. That evening, she stirred the stew while Toma sharpened the old hatchet. Pip curled against her side and drifted off to sleep. No one asked if she would leave again. Maybe because they already knew the answer. But the world always has a way of testing choices. It came in the form of a knock. Sharp, familiar, a rhythm that struck bone. Marta froze mid-stir. Sully dropped the spoon. The youngest whimpered. Toma moved before anyone else, reaching for the hatchet by the door. Marta placed a hand on his arm. No, she said softly. This one is mine. She stepped forward. Her fingers didn't tremble as they slid the latch. Cutter stood there, damp from snow, breath visible, hat in hand like it mattered. His eyes scanned her, and he smirked. Didn't expect you to last. He said, figured coyotes got you. Marta didn't answer. You come with the cabin. He added, I paid your father. That makes you mine. The children were watching. She could feel it. Faces behind the fur curtain. Hearts pounding. She stepped fully into the doorway. Her coat hung heavy on her shoulders, but her spine was straight. You think this fire, these kids, will keep you from what's owed? He sneered. Marta looked him in the eye. You beat a woman and left her in the snow, she said. Now you're trying to reclaim a ghost. Cutter blinked. You're no ghost. No, she said, louder now. I'm what happens when the ones you forgot find each other. He lunged, but before he reached her, Toma and another boy slammed the door shut. It cracked against Cutter's arm. He cursed and stumbled back. The children didn't cry. They moved like they had always known how, locking the door, bracing the wood. You'll regret this, Cutter screamed before fading into the trees. Inside, Marta's breath trembled, but she didn't fall. She turned to the children, every one of them watching her not with fear, but trust. Sully moved beside her and whispered, "He come back maybe." "Not tonight," Marta replied. Toma placed the hatchet at her feet. She didn't need to use it. She'd already chosen. That night, she sat by the fire, the fur heavy across her shoulders, Pip sleeping in her lap. She didn't tell stories. She didn't make promises. She just stayed. Because staying wasn't weakness. It was war. A quiet war against abandonment. Against silence. Against a world that said no one would come for them. She wasn't their mother, but she was their shield now. And somehow, in choosing not to run, Marta had become something more than a survivor. She had become a leader. The letter came folded in oil-stained parchment, slipped under the cabin door like a snake in the dark. Marta opened it with steady fingers. Even before the children could see, the township seal was stamped in red wax, cracked, cheap, official. The words inside were stiff, cold, written by someone who had never set foot in the snow that nearly killed her. You are hereby informed that the land previously occupied by William Cutter has been reclaimed by the township due to abandonment and unpaid taxes. Current occupants must vacate within 30 days or face removal. Marta read it once, then again. Her hands didn't shake, but something colder than the letter settled in her gut. This land? This cabin? This fire they built from bones and frost? They called it abandoned, as if she hadn't bled into the floorboards. As if 7 children hadn't buried their mother beneath the roots outside. As if survival itself didn't make a place sacred. She folded the letter and slid it beneath the firepit stone. She didn't speak of it that night. Not to Toma, who was patching the shed roof. Not to Sully, who was trying to sound out her own name in crooked letters. Not to Pip, who had finally stopped hiding under the bed during storms. Instead, she made rabbit stew, helped with the reading lesson, and stitched a rip in the curtain. But every motion was slower, heavier, calculated. The next morning, she saddled the old mare Nakai had given them. She didn't ask permission, didn't promise she'd be back by dusk, didn't say why she was going. The ride to Dry Creek took 4 hours. The sun had barely risen when the town's leaning steeple appeared on the horizon, pointing like an accusing finger at the sky. Nothing had changed. Same cracked boardwalks. Same curtains drawn tight behind shuttered windows. The same dry dust and wet judgment in the air. When she stepped into the sheriff's office, he didn't look up at first. "Well," he muttered after a beat. "Look what winter dragged in." Marta placed the letter on the table between them like a declaration of war. "I'm not leaving," she said, flat and firm. The sheriff finally looked at her, eyes squinting beneath a battered hat. "It's not your land." "Was it Cutter's?" she asked. "A man who bought a woman and threw her into the snow? A man you let operate out there without a second glance?" His jaw tensed. "Cutter signed for it. You didn't." "No," she snapped. "I bled for it." He didn't respond. She stepped closer, her boots thudding softly against the floorboards. "You sit here with your badge and your paper laws and pretend you know what ownership means. But you didn't see what I saw. You didn't hear the silence of children who didn't cry when they were abandoned. Because they already knew crying wouldn't help." "Marta." "No," she said again. "You don't get to say my name like it means something. I was sold. I was beaten. I was left to die. And those children, are the only reason I'm alive. So if you think some ink on a page is going to make me walk away from the only place I've ever truly belonged." She leaned forward, her voice low and deadly calm. "You don't understand what I've become." The sheriff looked at her for a long moment. He wasn't a cruel man. Just a tired one. A man shaped by rules that never fit women like her. You're asking me to ignore the law, he said at last. I'm asking you to remember that law was written by people who never lived through what we have. He sighed and looked away. You have no deed, no claim. But I have a home, she said, and that's more than Cutter ever gave anyone. She turned without waiting for more. The boardwalk creaked beneath her boots as she walked out. No one followed, no one stopped her. When she reached the edge of town, she didn't look back, not at the church where her father once sat stone-faced during auctions. Not at the dry goods store where whispers still lived in the walls. She rode in silence, and when she returned, the children ran to her like gravity. Sully clutched her sleeve. Did they take it? No, Marta said. They didn't. Toma didn't ask what she'd done. He simply handed her a bowl of stew and sat beside her like nothing had changed, because everything had already changed long ago. That night, Marta stepped outside with a carving knife and pressed its tip into the wood frame of the cabin door. She didn't write a name. Not hers. Not Cutter's. Not the sheriff's. Just one word, deep and final. Ours. She pressed it again and again, until the edges were clean, until the wood curled like curls of smoke around the blade. It wasn't for visitors. It wasn't for warning. It was for her. A woman who had nothing but now stood for something. A family forged not from blood, but from survival. A place not given, but earned. The wind picked up that night, whispering past the trees, brushing her hair off her face. She stood there a moment longer, hand on the doorframe. Then she went inside, and closed it behind her, not to shut the world out, but to keep the right one in. Spring didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, hesitantly, like Marta herself had when she first stepped into this cabin. First, in the way the snow pulled back from the tree trunks. Then in the drip 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 from the roof, falling into the rusted pail they had placed beneath the eaves. But the biggest change came in how the children breathed. Not just easier, not just deeper. They laughed more freely now. Sully read aloud in the mornings from the tattered book Nakai had brought. Pip no longer clung to Marta's leg during windstorms. And Toma, silent, steady Toma, had begun mending the old shed without being asked. The air inside the cabin had changed, too. Less like survival, more like home. One morning, Marta stepped outside and found Sully crouched near the edge of the clearing, her small hands digging into the softening ground. What are you planting? Marta asked. Medicine root, Sully said, not looking up. Grandmother showed me. I wanted to grow here now. Marta knelt beside her. You think it'll take? Sully shrugged. Ground was hard, but I break it up. Give it sun. Maybe it stay. Marta reached out and brushed a streak of dirt from the girl's cheek. That's how people grow too. Sully tilted her head. We not people. We are, Marta said, voice quiet but sure. But now we get to choose where we grow. What kind of soil we stay in. The words surprised her. They had lived in her chest for weeks. But this was the first time she'd let them out. That afternoon, the children pulled out strips of hide and raced between trees with makeshift kites catching wind. Their laughter echoed through the forest like bells. Marta stood in the doorway, arms crossed over the fur at her shoulders, and watched. She hadn't cried in weeks, not from fear, not from pain, but now tears touched her lashes. Soft and honest, not grief, not even joy, just release. Later that evening, as the fire burned low and the children slept in a bundle of limbs and breath, Marta reached for her carving knife. She stepped out quietly into the cool night, the sky above full of stars not even the town could name. At the doorframe, she placed the knife to wood. She didn't write her name, didn't write a warning, just 4 letters, carved deep and slow. Ours. She didn't need permission. She wasn't asking for approval. She was claiming, not with paperwork, not with a deed signed by men who never saw the bruises, but with survival, with stew and medicine roots and laughter in the wind, with mittens stitched from scraps and names written in shaky English letters, with a roof they patched, a hearth they fed, and a home they guarded. The cabin had never been given to them. It had been abandoned, left for snow to eat and silence to claim. But they made it theirs, not because they were allowed, because they refused to be erased. The next day, the letter came, folded in a trader's satchel, water-stained and stiff. Official. Stamped with a township seal and written in the same voice that once labeled people property. It said the land had been reclaimed by the town. That anyone still living there had 30 days to leave. Marta read it, then folded it, and slid it under the stone beside the fire pit. She didn't tell the children that night. She roasted rabbit. She helped Pip draw the alphabet. She sang an old lullaby beneath her breath while stitching a curtain hem. But the next morning, she saddled the mare and rode to Dry Creek alone. It was a quiet trip. She didn't feel fear, just fire. She walked into the sheriff's office and placed the letter on his desk. "I'm not leaving," she said. He looked at her like a man who'd seen ghosts before and didn't know if she was one of them. "You don't have the right," he replied. "I don't need it," she said. "I have a roof that hasn't leaked in months. A child who reads now. A cabin that's fed 7 mouths through the coldest winter we've had in years." She leaned in. "And I have scars to prove that land is mine." He didn't argue. He didn't promise mercy. He just stayed quiet while she turned and walked away. Back at the cabin, the children ran to her like she was part of the wind itself. Sully handed her a bowl of warm stew. Toma placed an armful of firewood at her feet. Pip curled up against her side without a word. They didn't ask what happened. Because they didn't need to. That night, Marta stepped outside one last time and looked at the word she had carved into the doorframe. Ours. She traced each letter with her fingers. It wasn't bold. It wasn't defiant. It was truth. This land, this place, this family, they hadn't been given any of it. But they had earned it in the only currency that mattered. Love, grit, blood, fire. And now, no letter could take it from them. Not the law, not the town, not Cutter, not even time. The spring wind blew soft that night. The kites flapped gently in the trees. And inside the cabin, beneath a roof they had rebuilt together, 7 children slept soundly, safe. And Marta? She was no longer surviving. She was rooted, and no one could pull her up again.